Welcome back to Second Helping, the podcast of choice for fans and followers of the number one league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnLine.com, part of the On3 network, back with you alongside my great friend and co-host, Brent Beaird, a longtime college football analyst, most recently of First Coast News in Jacksonville, Florida. In fact, Brent and First Coast News going to have some live coverage for you from down in Orlando for LSU and Florida State coming up on Sunday night. We'll get into more of that a little bit later in the show. But of course, Brent also a voter in the race for the most prestigious individual honor in all of college football, the Heisman Trophy. All of that out of the way, Brent. No shortage of topics. We've got a couple of SEC games, a couple of SEC teams that took part in action on Thursday night. So we'll review Florida, Utah, Missouri, South Dakota, and then, man, between Saturday and then again that cherry on top sort of matchup with LSU, Florida State, we got a lot to get into today, don't we?
Well, we really do, and I love this time of year when you've got college football from Thursday through the following Monday. So that's great, and really. Obviously, some of the big news now is that and we won't spend much time on this, but it is worth repeating that the ACC has added Cal and Stanford and SMU. Obviously, they did that, Trev, as you know, that you and I discovered years ago that you follow the money, and they're getting like 55 more million from ESPN in order to do so. It's still not real sure that, and I've talked to some FSU people, and they said that they really aren't any more excited about playing Cal than they are Wake Forest right now. But just to update folks, wanted to throw that in, and yet another change, Trav, in college football.
Yeah, that one reeks of two-way desperation. The ACC in that mode, especially with talk and loud, not just grumblings, but just very vocal in its displeasure with the league from the Florida State corner of things here of late. But you've got a couple of Pac-12, Pac-4 type teams, I guess you call it these days, looking to sort of find a life raft in Stanford and Cal. And then also SMU, from its perspective, it has seen TCU in recent years move on to the Big 12. It has seen Houston move on to the Big 12. So just within its own state, its own footprint, SMU feeling the heat to try to get to that Power 5 level. And just very interesting, as we talked about, just some of the logistical issues that are going to be a part of some of these leagues. Just amazing to think that there's going to be a league called the Atlantic Coast Conference with teams from Palo Alto and Berkeley, California.
Yeah.
You know?
And two things real quick. SMU so desperate to get in that they have waived any revenue for like the first 7 years.
Yeah.
Saying their boosters will do it. And Trav, how about that little tap on the head from North Carolina and from some of their border regions that said, no, we do not agree that this expansion should be taking place. So I'm hoping that the ACC, and I think they'll be smarter than this, won't come out and say, well, it was unanimous. How about that?
Yeah, it was pretty obvious, I think, that UNC especially was not particularly pleased with the prospects of adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU. But Brent, we certainly got a lot to get into as it relates to Thursday night action involving teams in the Southeastern Conference. Let's start with that game out in Salt Lake City. I think in some ways, some of Florida fans' worst expectations were realized in this game, but I thought there were also some positives. I know it's a loss ultimately for the Gators, 13-point defeat on the road against a top 15 team playing without its starting quarterback. We had anticipated that in the lead up to this game with Cam Rising coming off that knee injury sustained in the Rose Bowl to cap the 2022 season. But boy, just mistakes from the Florida standpoint. Penalties, red zone failures, missed field goals, shanked punts, duplicate numbers on a punt return in a 7-3 game. I think you could kind of point to some different areas, especially for this Florida offense. And again, there were some bright spots. Graham Mertz, I thought, got better as the game went on.
Right.
Unfortunately for Florida, that was largely out of necessity because they could not get Etienne and Johnson going in the run game. But how did you see this from that perspective, starting maybe more so with the Florida offense?
Trav, I never thought they committed to the run game was the biggest problem. That's the strength of their offense, and they really never tried to get it going. Look, when you look at Mertz numbers, 31 of 44, Trav, there's no way in the world he needs to be throwing 44 passes. He needs to be throwing about 20 less, and they only ran the ball 21 times. I thought the offensive line really struggled at times. Boy, George from Alabama was not any help to them whatsoever. But Travis, tell me what was worse here: the performance on the field, Dan Mullen having to tell them about it from the studio, and or Gator fans not able to watch the game because Charter and Disney decided at 8 o'clock to have a feud, and Gator fans in South Florida not being able to watch the game. So I'm not real sure which was worse out of the three.
Gator fans might have been spared that weren't able to get the broadcast. Might have been some mental health relief for them. Look, Damian George, we'll start with him at the right tackle position. Obviously, there's been some situations with that group going into the offseason and then throughout the offseason that didn't come to fruition, I'm sure, like Florida had hoped. And for Alabama fans who watched that game or covered Alabama in recent years, unfortunately, that was the Damian George that you sort of remembered from his time in 2021, especially with the Crimson Tide. And not to beat up one guy because they had mistakes across the board. I think ultimately, if you're a Florida fan, you understand that from a talent level perspective, you're still trying to get back to that Florida standard. And the current recruiting rankings for the 2024 cycles speak positively to Billy Napier and the staff achieving that. Kind of a brick by brick approach that you expected with Billy Napier. However, there's one thing about maybe not being at that level from a roster perspective that you've been at in previous eras of Florida football, but the lack of discipline and execution and just continuously making the kind of mistakes you absolutely cannot make, especially on the road against a good team. That's the thing that's going to stick in the craw of Florida fans. And you got McNeese State coming up next, so that's a get well game. And so you expect that to be the case, but you're just not going to prove much to your own fan base if you beat up on an FCS opponent coming up here. It's still going to be, let's see what happens with, say, Tennessee down the road coming up, and those type of opponents, Kentucky. Those kind of games are still what ultimately are going to define year two for Billy Napier and really the offensive staff in general, because I think Austin Armstrong showed you and that defense showed you that there were some signs of improvement. They gave up a couple of explosive plays, especially the first one on the opening snap of the game for Utah, a 70-yard touchdown pass. But I think you saw some glimmers of hope on the defensive side. Offensively, I think if you're a Florida fan, you were just thrilled to see that group get in the end zone in the fourth quarter there. It took a while, and third down was a disaster too for the Gators.
The defense, frankly, only allowed 270 yards. And after the first play of the game, they only allowed 200. So give them credit with that. I thought the having two players in the game with number 3 on the back of their jersey was now that's correctable, obviously, but that was a killer in the game as far as momentum. 1 of 13 on third down was also difficult, to say the least. But and I think what people need to they need to realize a couple of things. Number one, and I know he provided sparkling analysis last night in quotes, but Dan Mullins, a lot of the reason Florida's in this predicament to begin with, because he either couldn't recruit or didn't want to recruit. So Napier's making up for that. So, but they're not going to make changes with Napier at the end of this year and continue some of the mistakes they've made. But my last point on the game, Trav, is I want to give Utah a lot of credit. Whittingham is a tremendous football coach, and he's got what, Trav, double-digit years right now on a lot of coaches with the in the SEC, certainly including Napier. But man, that's a solid football team to be able to do what they did without their quarterback, without their center, their tight end. They had two defensive players out. They're basically what we talked about all summer. They're a very tough SEC-like football team that's just hard to beat. And Trev, you've been out there in that atmosphere, in that stadium, and at home they're almost impossible to beat.
Yeah, it reaffirmed my analogy, for me anyway, that this is Utah right now is Frank Beamer era Virginia Tech West.
That's a great analogy.
It's a lot like that with that program, and that was last night. That was kind of a Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech kind of win. It felt like won special teams, was just solid enough, won the lines of scrimmage, and win by a couple scores without your starting quarterback. So impressive, no doubt about it. I did think for Florida, Ricky Pearsall did some really good things at the wide receiver position. Probably could have had even a bigger night. I think Wilson, Burke, Douglas at the wide receiver position showed you some positivity at their spots. But again, you can't have Etienne and Johnson combining for 10 carries and just 31 rushing yards and win many games with this football team. It's just not going to happen. It didn't happen at Utah on Thursday night, and it won't happen once the Gators get within the SEC, if that's the situation that this team is put in. Let's talk about Missouri 35, South Dakota 10. Boy, Brady Cook, I guess you could say, very efficient. We did see some of Sam Horn also at the quarterback position for the Tigers, and they also got a pretty big night on the ground.
Yeah, they did. And Trev, I've got to ask you, how impressed are you with Luther Burden? Took a helmet to helmet hit, and it just kept on going. I think they're fine at quarterback. Certainly they've got Sam Horn there too, as you mentioned, who got in a little bit. Also, now to me, this is kind of typical Eli Drinkwith. They got to win. It wasn't they didn't have a lot of fireworks or anything of that nature, but at the same time, they got the job done. Now he gave a lot of credit to Drinkwith did to South Dakota and what they did. So, I mean, it was just kind of a standard 35-10 type win. Trev, frankly, this is what Florida needed. Instead of playing Utah, Florida needed to play a South Dakota just to be able to work some of the bugs out. But Missouri did, and frankly, overall, I think they were fairly solid against an opponent they should have beat.
Yeah, they took care of business. I mean, Cody Schrader runs for 138 yards.
Right.
Given the opponent, you see Missouri get out to a 28-3 halftime lead, and they were never really threatened in that 25-point win. And Absolutely. Luther Burden living up to the recruiting ranking that accompanied him to Como a couple of years ago, looking like that guy. And they need him to be that guy, especially with Dom Lovett moving on from the wide receiver position. And you're right. It is the kind of game that you would rather start with at a place like Missouri for sure. And even Florida in its current situation. If you could have had McNeese State this week and then go to Utah next week, maybe things would have been different. But for Mizzou, I like the way the schedule sort of sets up too, because they take a step. It seems like every week, it was South Dakota this week, then it becomes Middle Tennessee next week, and of course Middle Tennessee playing at Alabama on Saturday night. So, and then September 16th, Missouri hosts Kansas State. So it's gradual in terms of degree of difficulty, which I'm sure Eli Drinkwitz appreciates from a schedule perspective.
Yeah, has to be able to do so, and I think he was complimentary of his staff, and they made some changes. And Drinkwitz, I'm going to combine the Missouri and Florida here. Drinkwitz said at the end of the year, in the beginning of the off season, that they really needed to change, and he needed to quit calling plays and just kind of be the CEO. And I know this will come up over the next few days, and so at least for game one, that worked well for Missouri. Travis, I'm just wondering, and you can't change in midstream here, but I'm just wondering at the end of the year, is that something that Billy Napier looks at and maybe bring in a play caller too?
Exact thought I had. I think you're right on it. Potentially, anyway. We'll see. Again, maybe this Florida offense, the offensive line starts to come together a little bit more. This is a group that hadn't spent a lot of time together. You got a new quarterback in there in Graham Mertz. It's different dynamics across the board for that offense from a personnel perspective. So there's certainly some potential for things to come together a great deal more than they did for the season opener. But I don't think it's unreasonable to think right now anyway that a scenario similar to the one involving Drink at Mizzou could come into play perhaps for Billy Napier in the not too distant future. All right, let's get into Saturday's game. Let's do some Saturday's games. Let's do some previewing, Brent. We'll start with that noon Eastern window. Ball State at Kentucky. Typically, when you lose a quarterback to the NFL draft, there's not much excitement or as much excitement going into the next season. But given the changes at not just the quarterback position, but also a reunion there at the offensive coordinator spot, seems like that is the case. There is excitement for this Kentucky offense, especially if the line of scrimmage can pick up its play.
No doubt. And that was a real weakness last year for them was the offensive line. And Trav, how about Ray Davis coming over from Vanderbilt and being able to run the ball for them, hoping to replace, if anybody can, Chris Rodriguez. So I think there is as much intrigue in watching Devin Leary and Liam Cohen, an offensive coordinator, with this team as there is just about anybody. And if they can pull all that together, I think Kentucky could be very dangerous. I'm not ready to say they're going to supplant Georgia because they're not, but this is a team that I think starting on Saturday is going to be frankly a fascinating watch. And listen, how well would it speak for Stoops, Trav, to be able to fix some of these weaknesses in the next year? Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to fix some of the problems you got on your team. He could go a long way in making a lot of progress this year with that.
Well, just in the month of September, you look at this Kentucky schedule, you figure a win over Ball State Saturday, Eastern Kentucky in Lexington the following week, followed by Akron on September the 16th. Really, all that stands between Kentucky and a 4-0 start with Florida coming to town on September the 30th, is a road game at Vanderbilt on September the 23rd. So, I mean, when you look at it, this probably should be a 4-0 team with an SEC Eastern Division rival like Florida coming to the Commonwealth. And you need to get it while you can, because then things definitely pick up. After Florida, you get Georgia on the road. And so, and then Tennessee a couple of 3 weeks after that. So very important, Brent, for this Kentucky team to sort of make hay while it can.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And being able to have that momentum, I mean, that's something a lot of teams don't have, is to gradually get into it. And before you hit that Florida, Georgia, Missouri, and Tennessee stretch that they've got. And Trav, I'll tell you this too, that's not going to be an easy game for Alabama either, is it? In November, when they go to Lexington, now Kentucky may be beat up, have a lot of issues by the time November comes around, but the Cats are rarely much fun to play at the end of the year.
Also in that early window on Saturday in Nashville, Tennessee, taking on the Cavaliers of Virginia. College football 2023, Brent, here's what you need to know. Watching NC State and UConn, we talk about Devin Leary going from NC State to Kentucky. Well, NC State starting quarterback this year is Virginia's starting quarterback from a year ago. Brennan Armstrong now at NC State. Yeah. So you wonder about that position for the Cavs going into this matchup with Tennessee. Not so much the concerns for the Vols behind center, not just because of Joe Milton, a veteran, being in place there, but quarterback depth in general, based on recruiting success here of late, looks to be a real strength for this Tennessee offense as well. This is a game that I think people are going to go into expecting Tennessee to make a statement in against an ACC opponent.
Well, and I think one of the more interesting things about this game, and you were just there, is frankly just playing it in Nashville. I think that gives a little bit more attention. Now, look, I feel really for Virginia and what they've had to overcome, the death of their three players who were shot last year, and heard an interview with Elliott, their head coach, and I thought he was pretty honest, Trav. He said, look, we're not even looking at wins and losses this year. We've just got to get our team back together from a emotional standpoint with the grief that they've been going through. So there's no doubt, I mean, this would be an easy win for Tennessee. Hopefully Virginia can play better. And Travis, and we've talked about this now for weeks, and I'm still curious, will Cooper Mays at the Tennessee center, how much is he going to play? Is he going to be healthy, and is he going to be healthy soon? And it'll be fun to see Tennessee go up and down. So Cooper Mays at center, and will that ball defense be more improved? Certainly two questions they need to start to answer coming on Saturday.
They do. And you think about this Tennessee schedule, Virginia on Saturday, Austin Peay a week from Saturday, and then it's off to Gainesville for that aforementioned matchup with the Gators down in the swamp, or at least what used to be the swamp. I don't know. Do we still refer to it as the swamp, I think, these days. Also, in the earlier part of the schedule on Saturday involving SEC teams, Arkansas hosting an FCS opponent in Western Carolina. I think we're expecting a fast start for this Arkansas team, given the opponent. But again, another team from a schedule perspective, you're really looking ahead to some matchups not too far down the road.
No question about that. And it really helps them to have Western Carolina and Kent State before they hit that BYU, LSU, A&M, Ole Miss, and Alabama and Mississippi State. Oof. Man alive. That's just absolutely brutal, to say the least. And to me, this is the new coordinator game, isn't it, Trav? Travis Williams comes back on defense. Will they be more aggressive? Dan Enos, who has been around the bend a little bit at Alabama, at Miami, and and back in Arkansas, KJ Jefferson, Rocket Sanders. So, hey, hey, Trav, how many yards could Rocket Sanders get in those first two games of Western Carolina and Kent State?
All that he wants, I think, especially on Saturday. At least that's your expectation if you're an Arkansas fan, because with Dan Enos in there again as the offensive coordinator, you expect more pro concepts perhaps in the offense, which could very well benefit KJ Jefferson and certainly Rocket Sanders when you talk about translation to the next level and how they'll be able to be evaluated. I don't think that's as much of a concern for Rocket Sanders. I think NFL people know exactly what he's going to bring to the table, but more so for KJ Jefferson. Also, if you're a tight end at Arkansas, you love having Dan Enos in there because history tells us he'll utilize those guys as well in that Razorback offense. So again, you mentioned that upcoming slate too. So like Kentucky, Arkansas, a team that needs to stack some wins here while they can before things really ratchet up from a schedule perspective. Another FCS opponent involving an SEC matchup on Saturday. Ole Miss gets the season going. 2 p.m. Eastern time, hosting the Bears from Macon. Mercer in town to take on the Rebels. It looks like the quarterback situation, I'm not going to say it was a lot about nothing because Spencer Sanders obviously came to Ole Miss with legitimate credentials previously of Oklahoma State. But that'll still be something to keep an eye on. But similar to Arkansas and what you expect from Rocket Sanders against a defense like Western Carolina's, you're going to think Quinshon Judkins can pretty much have his way with this Mercer defense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And this is a decent little Mercer team. They beat UNA, North Alabama, up in that area where one Brent Beaird resides, by the way, Trav. So I think the interesting thing here obviously will be Pete Golding and what he's been able to do with the Ole Miss defense that have brought in double-digit transfers on that side of the ball, and they certainly needed to do it. I think another question is, how many quarterbacks does Lane Kiffin play? And certainly they start out with Jackson Dart and kind of see where that goes. They need this tune-up, Trav, because they go to New Orleans next week and play what I think is a good Tulane team and a good Tulane program before they really get in kind of the meat of the schedule. So you're right. It is Mercer and will be an easy win. But the fun thing about openers is there's enough questions for a team like Ole Miss to keep people tuned in.
Mercer, not a fun prep and not fun for defensive players because they are academy style on offense. And we saw this a couple of years ago, a cut block involving Will Anderson of Alabama in a game against Mercer caused him some issues there in the early portion, I want to say, maybe of his, I guess it was the 2021 season, had to be because 2020 was all SEC opponents. Yeah, he was, he was nicked up a little bit coming out of that game. So, but you're right. 3 of the next 4 for Ole Miss after Mercer right now against ranked teams, whether it's Tulane in the top 25 right now. Alabama certainly coming up on September the 23rd, and then follow that up with a visit from the Tigers of LSU. So as we move along with Saturday's preview and we get into that 3:30 Eastern time frame, the Auburn Tigers debut for Hugh Freeze as the first-year head coach of the Tigers, welcoming the Minutemen of UMass down. So obviously another one of these games involving an SEC team on Saturday that you anticipate the home team coming out in pretty good shape.
Yeah, but it'll be fascinating to see in a lot of ways. And I know this game's a sellout for Auburn too, with what Hugh Freeze does with the offense. Philip Montgomery calling plays instead of Freeze, and then Don Brown's UMass offense. The defense will be interesting against Peyton Thorne and how much will we see Jarquez Hunter. But Travis, again, I'm more concerned still with their line of scrimmage and how that line of scrimmage has been rebuilt, because they've got a very interesting game. I think they can win it, but they're going to Cal next week with different time zones and all that goes along with it. That goes along. They got Sanford coming up too, and then a brutal schedule that is going to be happening soon too. So there'll be a lot of attention certainly on Freeze and the offense, but I'm still more concerned about will Auburn be a lot better on the line of scrimmage than they were under Brian Harsin.
Intriguing team to watch on Saturday as well are the Bulldogs of Mississippi State in what is officially, I guess, the debut for Zach Arnett in year one. He did coach the bowl game following the just incredibly unfortunate passing of Mike Leach, but Mississippi State gets the Arnett era going with Southeastern Louisiana paying a visit to Starkville, Brent.
Well, and I think the big story here is how do they do with that? They won't be running much air raid. They're going to throw the ball down the field, and again, boy, Travis, and we've touched on this a bit, but Jo'quavious Marks at running back in having a true running back offense, and they got a Penn State transfer, Kevon Lee, then that will be interesting too. This is a very veteran team that's going to give a lot of teams some problems. State's got a very interesting game that's coming up next week when they play Arizona. But then my stars, you've got LSU, South Carolina, Alabama in a row. So these first two games very important for Zach Arnett in this bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we also want to talk about those primetime matchups, or at least they're going to kick off later in the day. I don't know if they officially qualify as primetime matchups in more than one or two of these instances, but Tennessee Martin traveling to take on the two-time defending national champion Georgia Bulldogs, another team within the league. And really, when you talk about college football elites undergoing change behind center, Carson Beck in for Stetson Bennett, and the expectation being, at least for the foreseeable future, because of this schedule that Georgia has in front of it, the Dogs are going to roll for a while, it looks like.
Yeah, they really are. Now, Travis, I'll say this, short of putting Brock Bowers, the All-American tight end, in the backfield, I still think there's some real concern about this running back room. Branson Robinson out for the year. Kendall Milton just has constant hamstring issues. Dejon Edwards with an MCL. It's not like they don't have running backs and that they're deep back there. But I can tell you this, the last thing they need, Trav, in September would be to have a few more running back injuries. So I think that is a concern for them to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Tennessee Martin's head coach is Jason Simpson, whose son is Ty Simpson, one of those quarterbacks in the mix at the University of Alabama. So you're going to have some Simpson folks tied into a couple of SEC games in those primetime hours on Saturday night. Before we talk about Ty Simpson and Alabama taking on Middle Tennessee, let's get into Texas A&M and hosting the Lobos of New Mexico. A&M with so much intrigue involving the addition of Bobby Petrino to the offensive staff and the return of a good bit of talent on both sides of the ball. And once again, a Jimbo Fisher team enters the season in position to do some big things, but there's still that bit of skepticism, I think. Wary eye, I guess you could say, when you look at a Jimbo team in this type of position to maybe do some good things.
Jimbo officially named Connor Wigman the starting quarterback, and that certainly didn't surprise us, but it will be interesting to see how much Max Johnson gets to play on this team. And again, and I think probably Petrino will call the plays. He certainly has, and it seemed like it's worked during camp, at least at this point. But look, the big thing to me about this game is A&M needs to come out of this game without any injuries, because Trav, they go to Miami next week and will be certainly, besides Alabama and Texas, will be a game that really gets a lot of people's attention. So the Aggies on the road next week, Coral Gables, 3:30 on ABC, and no doubt will be a incredibly hot game. So New Mexico gives them an opportunity to work out some of these bugs, and particularly at the coordinator positions.
Also, in that 7 o'clock window Eastern time on Saturday night, Vanderbilt looking to move to 2-0 as Alabama A&M comes up from Huntsville to pay a visit to the Commodores. I was in Nashville last Saturday night for the Doors' 35-28 win over the Rainbow Warriors of Hawaii. We had the weather delay, we had the construction situation, and really, though, it wasn't all that difficult to kind of get around. Now, I was a little bit disappointed. I know Vanderbilt in recent years hasn't exactly attracted huge throngs of crowds or fans to games, but it felt like almost a spring scrimmage getting in and out of Vanderbilt Stadium. It wasn't difficult at all, but I thought Vandy, I wouldn't say was listless at times in that performance against Hawaii. I would say more so give Timmy Chang and Hawaii staff a lot of credit, making that long trip, spending 3 full days essentially in Nashville before even playing the game on Saturday. That was an inspired group of Rainbow Warriors, but Vandy ultimately did enough. Some explosive plays, really special teams big in that win over Hawaii. Hawaii had some shortcomings in that area, and also some red zone situations that went the Commodores' way as well. But Clark Lee's team 1-0, and great shot here to go to 2-0.
Yeah, and that's the thing that matters. Trump, I'm curious what you saw from the running game. They only ran it 26 times for 42 yards, and that really hurt them, I understand, in the fourth quarter when they wanted to run the ball and just milk the clock and kind of end the game, and really could not do that. So I would imagine that will be and has been an emphasis this week.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit of a committee approach probably that continues on for the foreseeable future. Obviously, they like A.J. Swan throwing the football. I don't know how sustainable that approach is without having some semblance of dual threat at the position to kind of keep defenses in the SEC honest. But look, Will Shepherd showed you once again, he's upper echelon when it comes to SEC wide receivers as far as his performance in that win over Hawaii. But I walked away from that game with more questions than I thought I would have for Vanderbilt. And understanding, I mean, it's Vanderbilt. You're always going to have some questions, but I just expected a little bit more of a connected performance from the Commodores. I didn't expect Hawaii to have the success up front defensively that it had against that Vanderbilt offensive line. So that's a bit of a concern for me for the Commodores moving forward when you talk about the challenges that they still have on that SEC schedule. So as we keep it moving here in the nighttime hours for Saturday night, that aforementioned matchup of the Blue Raiders of Middle Tennessee traveling to Tuscaloosa, 7:30 Eastern on the SEC Network, taking on Nick Saban's Alabama Crimson Tide. 17th season opener for Nick Saban at the University of Alabama. That to me is about as crazy of a stat going into this one as any others that we'll talk about here in the next couple of minutes.
Well, and I can tell you this, some LSU beat writers who told me that when he was hired, that basically after every 2 or 3 years, there'll be a lot of rumors about him leaving. So his staying in Alabama and establishing what he frankly, has been amazing. And again, Rick Stockstill deserves a lot of credit at Middle Tennessee. He's been there double-digit years. They won 8 games last year, including beating Miami. Frankly, that game was not even close. So, look, and no doubt many storylines here. A lot of people are focusing in on the quarterbacks, but I'm interested, Trav, in the coordinators and how smoothly that situation goes. Will the offensive line be better? Will they have fewer mistakes and pre-snap penalties that they've had on defense and with the offensive line? So, listen, even though Bama favored heavily, the questions in this game are almost endless, aren't they, Trav?
There's plenty of reasons to tune into this one, including Kevin Steele's defense, which a year ago when he was at Miami gave up 408 passing yards to MTSU in an upset loss to the Blue Raiders for the Hurricanes. But certainly with Steele at Alabama now, even with the transition in the secondary, you expect a much different result. You also have a quarterback change for Middle Tennessee in this game as well. So it's not just Alabama breaking in a new starter. And from the Alabama side of this, where the quarterback is concerned, you're left to wonder how many of those guys might we see, and not just in terms of if the game is well within Alabama's command, but the plan. What is the plan for the quarterbacks? I think Jalen Milroe is the guy you're going to see out there first. I think if he plays well, you'll continue to see him out there. But as far as scripting in another guy, whether it's Ty Simpson or maybe Tyler Buckner, how does new offensive coordinator Tommy Rees go about that? Ultimately, this offense thinks it can hang its hat on the offensive line and running back position. So it's not going to ask this quarterback or quarterbacks to be Bryce Young. It's going to be more of a situation where the position can be complementary rather than centric to the production of the offense as a whole. So different dynamic, I think, in play for Alabama at quarterback, but you hit on it. I mean, there's more than just the quarterback position to take into account as this Alabama team tries to ready itself for a visit from Texas coming up 1 week from Saturday. Hey, we've got one of those SEC ACC matchups set for us too on Saturday night. Another one of those as North Carolina and South Carolina get together for the border war. Quarterbacks for both teams, I think, center stage in this matchup, Brent.
Yeah, Merciful Evans. The interest in this game, I think, and I frankly wish they played a little bit more often. This game's in Charlotte. Well, by the way, the ACC just moved its offices over to Charlotte. But if people haven't seen Drake May, they will enjoy watching him play. I mean, a lot of people think Drake May could be the NFL right now. And I think another big thing in this game, Marshawn Lloyd has left South Carolina and is now at USC. So I think, to me, besides a quarterback battle, will South Carolina have enough on the edge offensively to get some guys down the field with new offensive coordinator Dowell Loggins just to see what he's going to do? But Trav, to me, the key to this game is one, Gene Chizik returning at the coordinator for North Carolina. Has he been able to retool that North Carolina defense that, Trav, frankly, was abysmal last year?
Yeah, very bad from the North Carolina side of things. So interesting matchup with the Gamecocks and Tar Heels. Absolutely. And finally, as we wrap things up on our preview side of things for this weekend, Sunday night in Orlando. Interesting for LSU. It'll be its second straight game there, I guess, with the Citrus Bowl from the end of last season to this matchup against Florida State. Orlando just kind of the home away from home, I guess, for the Tigers these days. But Top 10 matchup, Florida State. We talk about quarterback play, Jordan Travis for the Seminoles, Jaden Daniels for LSU. I think what a lot of people are looking at, though, is that once you get past those guys, how do these respective rosters really match up from top to bottom? Brent, is Florida State at a point roster wide where it can do what it did a year ago and what was essentially a road game,
Yeah.
beat LSU in New Orleans? I think LSU feels like they're in a much different place going into year 2 under Brian Kelly than they were going into a season ago. How do you sort of see this one? And going to be great to have you down there doing some work as well.
Yeah. First Coast News is going to have a special before the game. We're really excited about that. Kind of previewing the season and obviously previewing this game. But Trav, as you know, there will be no shortage of LSU Tiger fans in that stadium and around that stadium during this time. LSU has done a really good job of restocking their roster, especially on defense, getting cornerbacks from Southeast Louisiana and Zai Alexander and Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse. I think not having Mason Smith does hurt LSU. He'll be back for the second game. What was suspended, but I still think two things here. I'm as much as I'm impressed with what Mike Norvell has done at FSU. I still think LSU has the better roster between the two. Now they're certainly comparable, and they're certainly a lot closer than they were. Again, the big contest here is going to be the FSU offensive line that has the most starts of anybody in the nation, that's a strength for them now against the LSU front seven. And Travis, to me, the one big key for FSU, they have to know where Harold Perkins is on every play. And my big question is, Trev, can they block Perkins for the extent of the game?
I think that's where Travis's mobility and playmaking ability with his legs could help Florida State. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm with you. It's interesting when you look at Florida State and Florida together. All those years that both seemingly had offensive line struggles at the same time. There was simultaneous. Right. There was a stretch where we talked about, man, Florida State, awful along that offensive line. Florida, we saw it as recent as Thursday night in Salt Lake City, struggling up front. But separation maybe between those schools, as much as anything, has probably come at that position, Brent. I think you said it. Florida State has elevated its play, needed to, and that's going to be the key to the drill, I think, for the Seminoles. I don't think they have to outright win up front against LSU, especially with Mason Smith out of the game. But there's still Mekhi Wingo you got to deal with, and you said it with Perkins and some other guys. But if they can just sort of neutralize things, that's where Travis can take advantage of his ability to do it with his legs and his arm and those other skill players that he has around him maybe.
Well, and I do believe, Trev, that and look, as you know, there's a lot of talk around here about Florida State being a playoff team, but I still think even if they lost this game in a close game, that the playoff committee would give them credit for playing a top 10 team at a neutral site, if you can say Orlando's a neutral site for FSU. So because I think they could play Clemson not once, but twice, because the ACC is doing away with divisions that the SEC will be doing next year. So we won't get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I think the thing I'm saying is the season won't collapse if Florida State loses a game.
And second helping's not going to collapse anytime soon. At least we hope not. But there you go. There's a complete rundown of this weekend's SEC action on the heels of Florida and Missouri playing games on Thursday night. So a lot of good stuff coming up in week 1 of the college football season, Brent. Always a time we both anticipate greatly. You got anything else for us before we get out of here?
Well, I think of this, and I know this is a odd thing, but people are expecting the AP poll on Monday. For that will not happen. It won't be released until Tuesday around 2 o'clock. So if people kind of, and they're not saying there's going to be a lot of shakeup in it during that time, but if folks are wondering when that's coming out, that is when it's going to be. So, boy, much going on in college football. We're just happy it is here, and wish we had 5 days of it straight at another time during the season like we do when it begins.
Yes, we get into Maction and Fun Belt and maybe some of that stuff coming up down the road for the college football season. Always great stuff with Brent Beaird, college football analyst for First Coast News. I'm Travis Reier. This is the Belly Up Podcast Network. So anywhere you consume pods, you're going to find Second Helping. We certainly hope you'll subscribe. Leave us a review while you're there. That would help us out tremendously. Brent, look forward to catching up next week.
Me too, bud. Can't wait. Take care.
For Brent Beaird, Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us right here on Second Helping. And until next time, so long, everybody.